and welcome to part 2 about chapter 6, What Employers Owe Employees for Business Ethics in the fall of 2023 at Lehman College. We left off talking about harassment and safety and diversity in representation, how they come together to create an environment for employees that may be fair and just, may be ethical, or may not be. And now we're going to talk about the very last part of the first section of chapter 6, in which we think about the additional benefits that shape how our workplace environment is and affects us day to day. So, of course, we get paid when we go to work every day, but what else can contribute to a good or a bad environment? And one answer is benefits. How is the health insurance? Is there child care? Is there maternity or paternity leave? Do you have flexible scheduling? Are people treated as fully human equals, or are they looked upon with suspicion and everything that they need for their own human lives treated as if they're trying to steal from the company? And oftentimes that can be kind of a marker between the differences, between blue collar and white collar jobs, wherein people in white-collar jobs in management and corporations, computer programmers, are given more slack and leeway to arrange their own days how they choose, because they're trusted to be productive within that time. However, in a more hostile workplace, a less ethical workplace, you can be looked on as if you are trying to steal from the company every time you might need to leave an hour early to pick up your kids, or schedule your deserved and owed vacation time, even in advance. Many studies. It's not my favorite in this book that sometimes they just hint at one study and think that that's enough. You may be right to question when they just talk about one study, but this is pretty well documented knowledge over decades and decades that people who are treated as humans with respect are more productive, they're more focused, they are more loyal to the company. They take fewer sick days, there are fewer on-the-job accidents, there's better customer treatment, and all these intangibles that are hard to pin down, like imagination and creativity in problem solving, tend to shoot through the roof when a supportive and open and trusting environment is created. People have rightly, in my view at least, given a backlash to the corporate speak where they say, oh, we're family here, or we're going to try and make work fun. But at the same time, if everybody has to be there every day, you can recognize the difference between a punitive workplace where the bosses punish people for having camaraderie or conversation amongst themselves, jokes, connection, and where that's encouraged. All of these things contribute to whether or not the workplace is one that can retain employees long term, which directly contributes not only to the right and wrong of how you organize your business, but also the bottom line. We get a little bit of a breakdown here about how men and women value benefits that may be offered by their workplace. I found this infographic a little frustrating but interesting at the same time. I don't like when necessarily Men and women are grouped as gigantic wholes because there are quite big variations depending on other identity markers often, including whether this workplace is low income, middle income, high income, or if it's in the service sector or the manufacturing sector or the information technology sector. But for what it's worth, women in this particular study seem to value benefits a little bit more than their male counterparts. And we can look to see traditional gender roles having maybe a causal influence on this. Women are more concerned with having better insurance, work from home options, flexible hours, and vacation time, not to mention maternity leave. Because still in our culture, women do most of the child rearing and can be better, more productive workers if these environmental options are in place. And then if their male counterparts prefer any benefits, it is more lifestyle focused, like gym membership, free food and coffee, and on-site gyms. When we think about workplace benefits, we often think of the tech giants like Google and Microsoft and Amazon, and we get to know some of the specifics in this section. Right after the infographic, we learn about Google, for example. Google is constantly searching for ways to improve the health, well-being, and morale of its Googlers. This is from our book. Famous for offering unusual perks like bicycles and electric cars to get around their office campuses. There's generous paid parental leave, on-site childcare. You can take a sabbatical from work to go get more degrees. And if you pass away, your spouse gets compensation for years afterward, as well as your children. But of course, Google's not the only one that tries to attract and retain high quality employees with these kind of benefits. And we get a little link to learning in our book that is worthwhile right at the end of this section. So that's the end of 6.1, or ethical concerns about the environment of our workplaces. I should have probably finished up that section in the first video, but I am always eager to not make these things too long. And now we can move on to the second part of the chapter, remembering that the overarching main point is to think about what employers owe to their stakeholders that are employees. What about compensation? We thought about setting up a fair and just environment for people who have to come in and spend a lot of their time every single day for decades at the same place. Well, people move jobs more frequently, but you know what I mean. Well, now what about your pay? That's maybe the most important consideration when it comes to what employers owe their employees and what makes some salary fair and what makes it unfair. It's a controversial issue in the United States, our book tells us, and I think that is an understatement. How we might decide what counts as a fair wage and who sets a fair wage, the market, the government, how does it get doled out between management and the average worker. I'm sure all of you are aware that there are many, many different viewpoints of how this should get done, and we'll take a look at that. We'll also think about the gender pay gap, possible ways that we might institute policies, equal pay for equal work. And that's not just gender, that's often in the United States specifically, racially imbalanced as well. And then we'll look at some companies that have tried more innovative approaches to getting their employees paid in a fair, ethical, and just way. So just like employees that are treated like criminals, employees that are paid very small amounts are worse employees. So we have this dual set of goals that we've been talking about all semester to make sure we are focused on profit, focused on creating a sustainable business, but also ensuring that how we go about doing so counts as ethical. And luckily, more and more businesses are recognizing that they can go hand in hand. That happy employees, satisfied employees, employees that can have some kind of control over their own lives, financially and environmentally, all that stuff we talked about before, do better work. They take less sick leave. They are more productive. They stay at the same company more frequently. They have less claims for health care. I think I've mentioned it before, but 2007, 2008, there was the housing crisis leading to a very big recession in the United States. So we are looking at wages or income after that crash. And you can see that for lower income jobs and families, 2007, you have down here, this is less than $50,000. It goes down for 2013, up slightly for 2016, but still has not matched the level of income in 2007. And the exact same trend for middle income people, where the household or the job has a compensation of around $100,000. And then you can move over to upper income, where it jumps all the way up to $750,000. And it's the only subsection that has gone up from 2007. Everybody else, lower than 10 years before. And this, I think, graphic is a little bit misleading because the percentage of people who are making upper income is so much smaller than the middle and lower income combined. And this sort of makes it look like it's balanced. This is what people are talking about when they talk about the 1%. 90% of people are in middle or lower income, 90+%. And there are only a handful of people and families and companies that end up in that upper income bracket. Our book tells us that there's a difference between a nominal wage and a real wage. So if you just look at the numbers, incomes have risen steadily. But we forget that there is massive inflation sometimes, and other times only a little bit of inflation. But your real actual purchasing power needs to be calculated with that in mind. And when you do that, you recognize that real wages have really not gone up as quickly as what things are actually worth. Our book tells us in the nearly 6 decades since 1960, the inflation-adjusted real minimum wage declined by 23%. So you have about a quarter less purchasing power than people did in 1960 if you are in middle or lower income. And you might ask yourself, is that fair? Is that ethical? That people are more productive than they ever have been. studies do show that as well. Yet they're being paid 25% less than they were 50 to 60 years ago. We get this graph to try and show that data off. So the minimum wage keeps going up and up. When it was first instituted, it was pretty low, all the way up to here where it's stagnated at what, 710, 725. Whereas this is when we think about adjusted for inflation. Up, 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 and then it crashes down. In New York City, you may or may not be aware, they passed their own laws, and New York City's minimum wage is $15, which many people say is still not enough to live comfortably without financial anxiety in this city. And it's not a federal thing. I mean, there is a federal minimum wage, but many states have created their own stricter policies to up the minimum wage and give people a chance at a living wage when they work a full-time job. And this still is a bit out of date. You see, it's 2017 when New York is in the $9.50 to $10.24 range. Of course, that's the whole state and not the city itself. This is grayed out because it's one of the text boxes all about the gender pay gap, and we haven't talked about the gender pay gap yet. So we're going to come here. I know there are slides in here somewhere. I guess not, though. I guess I might have messed up these slides. So I'll just talk about the gender pay gap first. And then we can think about the feature box, the ethics across time and cultures. So some people who are thinking about the gender pay gap say things like, well, historically at least, and still currently today, women quit their jobs for some amount of time to have children. They are less qualified thus, so they are promoted less frequently, and they get paid less because of the actual work they do. And you might not think it's fair, but it's the actual way things are. And people have done studies about this as well, and to show that that's not necessarily true. That even amongst women who have never taken time off for maternity leave, who have the same education, skills, and experience as men in the same role, are still paid about 30% less. 35% less, excuse me. And it gets worse when you include people of color. So your average white woman makes something, and these aren't the right exact percentages, but I'm just giving you an idea here, makes like 20% less than white men. And then I think black men make less, like 25%, something like that. And then it goes down to the different demographics in the United States to one where I think Hispanic women make something like 65% of the average white man. And now these aren't comparing secretaries to CEOs. These are comparing the same class of jobs. So if we're thinking about all of the custodial workers in a company, if you have a white male custodial worker, they're going to make $1. And you have a Hispanic female custodial worker, they're going to make 65 cents compared to that $1. And you might think, well, how do we fix this? Shouldn't the law make this not allowed? Aren't we supposed to be equal under the law? And kind of. Companies get around equality laws and statutes by changing things up a bit. The job descriptions are different slightly. The expected duties of a hired employee is slightly different. And thus people who have sued for discrimination have been said, well, these aren't the exact same jobs. And there have been attempts to change the wording of the laws, but they have not passed yet. And that's where we get this feature box, ethics across time and cultures. They talk about how things are different in Europe as to the United States. And if we wanted to think about countries that have done a bit better than us at making the gender pay gap smaller and the racial pay gap smaller, we might look to some of the policies that they used. So this, let's see here. A new Icelandic law, our book says, went into effect in 2018 that makes it illegal to pay men more than women in all jobs collectively with more than 25 employees. The burden of proof is shifted from the employee here to prove discrimination to the employer to show and publish data that everybody in the same job category is paid exactly the same. There are strong legal rights to childcare and education in Germany, which makes it so women do not have to worry about childcare in the same way that they do in the United States. And the United Kingdom has taken a first step toward addressing this issue by mandating pay transparency. So companies with more than 250 employees have to publish all of their salary data. So the critical thinking questions here are saying, okay, would any of these policies be enacted in the United States as it is right now? As much as I want to talk about the second one, how each of the normative theories of ethical behavior views these issues, I am a little disappointed that I haven't been able to talk to you directly about these things. I gave you the thunk video. I think that was that one. Or it was a video from a professor, I think in Oxford maybe, talking about these normative theories. But I still, before the midterm, want to get my descriptions to you about these things. So we don't have to worry about that for the moment. But it's interesting to consider how much can we look to other cultures' choices as either positive or negative role models of things that we could do to approach our idea of what it means to be fair, just, and ethical. That'll be the end of the second video. I will see you in video number 3. We will talk about section 6.3.